Halloween night fell upon the small, fog-shrouded town with an eerie quiet. Alex, Lisa, Ben, and Mia wandered down a winding road flanked by dense, rotting trees, searching for a thrill that would make this Halloween unforgettable. Stories had circulated for years about an abandoned mansion on the edge of town, known as Luceferium. It had belonged to a reclusive scientist, Professor Simon, who vanished under mysterious circumstances decades ago. Rumor had it that he had experimented with dark forces, seeking to bridge life and death. Some said he'd lost his mind. Others whispered he'd succeeded too well. "Come on, this'll be epic," Alex urged, grinning as he led the way. Mia stopped short, eyeing the imposing structure up ahead. "Are you sure about this? People say the professor's ghost still wanders around that place." Ben laughed nervously, trying to hide his own unease. "It's just an old empty house. What's the worst that could happen?" The mansion loomed before them, its warped roof and darkened windows like empty eye sockets staring into the fog. The front door, large and foreboding, was cracked open, as if waiting for them. Inside, the house was silent except for the occasional creak as they took their first steps on the dusty floorboards. The walls were lined with torn, faded wallpaper, peeling in patches to reveal strange symbols carved into the wood underneath. An overwhelming smell of rot hung in the air. It seemed to grow darker the farther they walked. "Let's look around," Alex suggested, eager to explore despite the tension. The others reluctantly followed, moving cautiously from room to room, their footsteps echoing ominously in the empty house. Rising action. The ground floor was a sprawling maze of rooms filled with broken furniture and debris. The dim light from their flashlights cast eerie shadows on the walls, highlighting strange marks scratched into every surface. Some looked like language. Others were grotesque, twisted shapes that seemed to shift in the shadows. "Did you see that?" Mia whispered, stopping suddenly. Her light had caught something in the corner of her eye, a flicker, like a shadow moving on its own. "Stop freaking yourself out," Ben chuckled, though his voice shook. He was trying to act tough, but every noise seemed to make him flinch. As they made their way through the decaying rooms, they found a staircase leading up. At the top, more intricate symbols covered the walls, larger and more disturbing. They stumbled upon what appeared to be a study, filled with old books and papers scattered across a massive desk. In the center was a weathered journal with pages covered in frenetic handwriting. "It's his notes," Alex said, excitement flickering in his eyes as he scanned the pages. Professor Simon's handwriting was desperate and erratic. Phrases like "transcending mortality" and "opening the doorway" were scribbled everywhere, along with a single, haunting word repeated over and over: Luceferium. "What do you think it means?" Lisa whispered, as if speaking too loudly would wake the house itself. "Maybe it's some kind of chemical compound?" Ben guessed, but his voice faltered. The room seemed to grow colder. Just then, Alex's hand brushed a page, and a faint, tingling sensation shot through his fingers, spreading down to his wrist. He pulled his hand back, watching as a dark mark began to appear under his skin, like ink bleeding beneath his flesh. Unnerved, Alex dropped the journal and backed away, trying to shake off the feeling. "We need to keep moving," he mumbled, unwilling to admit how rattled he felt. They decided to check the basement, where Professor Simon's most notorious experiments were rumored to have taken place. The stairs were narrow, winding into a pitch-black abyss. The stench of sulfur grew stronger, making their eyes water as they descended. At the bottom, they found a large, steel door bolted shut with heavy chains, covered in the same symbols they'd seen upstairs. Ben, ignoring his own misgivings, pulled at the chains, loosening them enough for the door to swing open. Climax. The room beyond was like something out of a nightmare. The walls seemed to pulse with a strange, organic texture, as if alive. A large tank filled with black, viscous liquid dominated the room, and a faint, high-pitched buzzing filled the air, growing louder as they stepped closer. Mia's flashlight flickered over the walls, illuminating disturbing images carved into the stone. Deformed faces stared out at them, mouths open in silent screams. "This place, it's wrong," Mia whispered, her face pale. Just as she spoke, she felt a sharp prick on her skin. Looking down, she saw thin, dark veins spreading from her hand where she touched the wall, snaking up her arm with impossible speed. Her skin started to twist, muscles contorting beneath her flesh. Her eyes turned black, rolling back to reveal empty orbs. "Mia!" Alex yelled, reaching out, but she threw him backward with an inhuman strength. She looked at him with a ghastly grin, her mouth stretching unnaturally wide as she laughed, the sound hollow and echoing. Slowly, the shadows in the room began to move, materializing into twisted, misshapen creatures with hollow eyes and grotesque features. Each one wore a twisted expression of agony, their mouths stretched into silent screams. They shuffled towards the group, their movements slow but deliberate, as if driven by an insatiable hunger. Panicking, Ben made a dash for the staircase, only to be intercepted by one of the creatures. Its skeletal hand wrapped around his throat, and with a sickening crunch, it twisted his neck back, leaving his body limp. Alex and Lisa were frozen in terror, their backs against the cold wall, watching as the creatures crawled towards them. Just as they thought all hope was lost, Lisa noticed an inscription on the wall beside them. "Only fire purges Luceferium." Desperately, Alex grabbed an old, dust-covered bottle from a nearby shelf, recognizing it as kerosene. He poured it over the advancing creatures and struck a match, throwing it onto the floor. Flames exploded, consuming the room as the creatures screamed, writhing in agony as the fire engulfed them. The flames spread quickly, licking up the walls and across the ceiling. Clutching each other, Alex and Lisa stumbled back up the stairs, the fire roaring behind them. They barely made it out the front door before the entire house erupted in flames. Falling action. Outside, they watched as the mansion burned, the shadows of writhing figures visible through the windows, their screams echoing into the night. The fire grew, casting an orange glow across the town, and the faintest whispers of something dark and ancient drifted on the wind, slipping into their ears like a ghost's final breath. In the days that followed, Alex and Lisa tried to return to normal, but they were haunted by what they'd seen. Mia and Ben were reported missing, but no trace of them was ever found. Their families left in agonized uncertainty. The police brushed off Alex and Lisa's story as a hallucination, claiming the trauma had distorted their memories. However, Lisa began to change. She grew distant, often staring into space, her eyes unfocused. She complained of terrible headaches and a feeling as if something inside her was crawling. Then, one morning, Alex woke to find a note from Lisa taped to his door. It read simply, "Luceferium is the key." Desperate, Alex rushed to her apartment, only to find it empty, her belongings untouched. There was no sign of her, and even her parents claimed she had never returned home. The nightmares began to worsen. Every night, Alex dreamed of Mia's hollow eyes and the twisted creatures in the basement. He felt a creeping sensation under his own skin, like a dark mark growing just below the surface, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. One night, as he lay in bed, he heard a faint scratching at his door. His heart pounded as he opened it, expecting to see an empty hallway. Instead, Lisa stood there, her face blank, her eyes black as pitch. "Luceferium is the key," she whispered, her voice cold and distant. A sickening dread washed over him as he saw the same dark veins spreading up her neck, pulsing faintly in the dim light. He stumbled back, watching in horror as she stepped closer, her body contorting, twisting into something unrecognizable. In his final moments, he realized the truth. Luceferium wasn't just a place or a substance. It was a curse, a darkness that had infected their very souls, a darkness that could never be purged. His scream echoed through the night as Lisa's face twisted into a nightmarish smile, her hollow eyes shining with a malevolent gleam. And as darkness closed in, Alex felt his own mind slipping, falling into the endless void that Luceferium had opened, a gateway to horrors that no one could escape.